All right, so Dusk is going to do a solo review for the film Reagan, which is starring Dennis Quaid. Dusk, take it away.
All right, Reagan, the 2024 film, is about the life and times of Ronald Reagan, both as a president and his life throughout. He's like throughout being born as being a born again Christian, working as a lifeguard, a radio announcer, getting into Hollywood, becoming an actor, and the many different trials and tribulations he went through his life to getting up to the point where he eventually became president of the United States. The many people he met along the way, and the many people that he's unfortunately had to go through or tussle with in order to get to be the person he was when he became president. It also talks about the story of his romantic life with Nancy Reagan and their relationship throughout the years as he had his ups and downs, both from his challenges when he was trying to talk with General Ford on his Republican nomination, when he was with the Republican National Convention, when that he lost to Jimmy Carter, to the famous "A Time for Choosing" speech in 1964, Republican presidential candidate, when he was trying to run for California in 1966, and when he is like eventually had to send a state National Guard when he clashed with student radicals at the University of California in Berkeley, to all the way in the 1985 when he was dealing with the Iran-Contra scandal, meeting with Gorbachev, the Geneva Summit, and a strategic defense initiative, and why he wanted to stick around for that. And then, of course, the tear down with the Berlin Wall speech he gave until eventually, and it's like after retirement and taking one last ride with his Secret Service agent, John Barletta, who was with him during that time, and the many ups and downs of Ronald Reagan. I mentioned all these things in it because they're all in it. It feels like a pastiche of the life and times of Ronald Reagan. And just about when you feel like they're going to cover something a little more deep in his in the time period that he's in, they move on to the next scene. It really feels like every time you're there, a new actor is present, and you're like, "Who's this character? Oh, okay, they said his name. Okay, all right, okay," and then they move on. And it just keeps going more and more and more as time moves on. You never really get a sense of the position in time as best as they can do. It just feels like it's moving from scene to scene. We got to get through his entire life. I think Dennis Quaid does fine in the role he's in. I just wish the script was unfortunately better. And as much as like you want, I wanted the relationship between Dennis Quaid and Penelope Ann Miller, who plays Nancy Reagan. I think they have some solid chemistry, but Nancy really doesn't have much to do, and she really just feels like the attaboy, you can do it, Ronald Reagan. Because if I'm going to be perfectly honest, this feels like one of these early 2000s to mid 2000s biopics we saw a lot of, where it's just kind of a pastiche of a film. They're covering a whole person's life. There's not a lot of time to really focus on it. And honestly, as much as they try to, the people who made this film clearly have a great respect for Ronald Reagan. They clearly do. The problem is, it's kind of like, it's a little too glossy, a little too respectful, because they really just kind of gloss over a lot of his mistakes, a lot of the mistakes he makes as a person, and they kind of just lift him up a little bit too much to be this icon, this character. He has his mistakes, but he's just trying to do his best, is again that really kind of does a disservice for if you're trying to paint a more nuanced story.
What do you think resemblance wise? You think he's pretty spot on?
I think honestly, when you see him and he's in the makeup, he does the things. He may not be a spot on reflection of Ronald Reagan, but he's able to carry some of the inflections. Although if I'm going to be perfectly honest, sometimes he felt more like a caricature of Ronald
Mm,
Reagan and not the person.
yeah. I don't know. I mean, listen, Dennis Quaid, handsome guy. I mean, 70 years old, very handsome man. That's a that's a pretty goofy ass picture of Dennis
I know,
Quaid.
I know. Hey,
I mean,
man.
I
I
don't
mean,
like
that's
that.
a great look at that smile.
I don't. He kind of got like a Jack Nicholson Joker smile right
Look at
there.
that
But
smile. How can
yeah.
you say no to that smile?
So yeah, so kind of saying, I mean, that's what the case with a lot of biopics is kind of, especially when you're doing historical figures, it's like
Mhm.
kind of feels like a collage of the greatest hits of their moments of their
Yeah.
lives. That's why we kind of felt about the Bob Marley movie that came out. It's like it doesn't really go in depth too much of any aspect of his life. It just
Mhm.
kind of goes through a lot of the greatest hits and hey, these are all the big moments, and here you go. So that's kind of the case here with Reagan, is what you're saying.
Yeah, unfortunately, it reminded me of Marley, I think, was able to contain itself in a culture at the period of time. And while it was more of a pastiche, they did bring up things that was in the culture, and you could tell there's a lot of respect for the is like for Marley. They were trying to do their best while trying to pay service to his care to him as a person, without and adding little nuances here and there. I'm going to be perfectly honest. Ronald Reagan has a long history, like really long history as a character. Like it feels like he's starting off he's born as a born again Christian, and he wants to get into politics. He eventually becomes a FBI informant. He divorces. He has a wife. He had his first wife with Jane Wyman, and they got in a divorce. And then, snap your fingers. Okay, now he's meeting Nancy Davis, and he helps her out because she's mistaken for another Nancy Davis who was on a blacklist because it was the Red Scare. And then, oh no, now he's appearing in a commercial in General Electric Theater, which was happening around the 1960s. And it's just like boom, 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 boom. It's like you're like on a roller coaster of the different life and times of Ronald Reagan. And I want to care, I want to, but you're just slipping past so many people and so many characters that at a certain point I was just like, honestly, you could just have titles under their name,
Mm.
and that would almost help a little bit. Like, oh, that's who you are, okay. But if you have no reference for Ronald Reagan or the history and culture, you're not going to get much out of this. If this was like, for instance, if you don't know much about that time period, I don't think this movie is going to help you. Like, oh, that was the time. That was all the different impacts he kind of had. It's there, but it feels almost disingenuous. You can feel they're trying. They are genuinely trying. Dennis Quaid is trying. The actress who plays Nancy Reagan,
Penelope Ann.
Natalie Ann Miller, she's trying. All the supporting cast is trying, but there's just so many
And this
because his
movie
life is
is
so long. Like he did so many things.
and this movie's what, 2 hours plus, right? 2 hours and
Yeah,
12 minutes?
2 hours plus, and it still feels like that it's
Mm,
not enough time is given to it. This is the biopics are hard by nature because especially covering a person's life. You almost do ironically get just the greatest hits and that's it, and they don't have much time to go in deeper.
mm,
And unfortunately, the fact that they treat him with not as much nuance and more of a caricature of Ronald Reagan, that you just kind of see what almost like what Republican slash what Americana wants people to. He's a character you want to remember him as, not who he was. You know what I mean? Like the Bob Marley. Oh, that's the Bob Marley people want to remember. May not be who he was exactly.
yeah. And, yeah, when we talked about the Marley film, that's a lot of things that we hit too about, it's the sanitized kind of view of somebody's life there,
Hmm.
that kinda maybe they'll hint at a little bit like with the movie Get On Up.
Hmm.
There's that moment where James Brown slaps the woman, right? When
Hmm.
and so it's kind of hinting like, okay, yeah, he did that. So he mentioned it once, so it kinda covers the lengthy kinda history he had with domestic violence, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so is there, any time in this movie where it shows Reagan in an unfavorable light, or is it most
Uh, I would say probably earlier on when he gets his divorce with Jane Wyman and him butting his heads with Herbert Sorrell. I think that's his name, Herbert Sorrell. Yeah, the union organizer when he was an FBI informant. He has tussles here and there, but it's always shown from a point of view of, I'm just trying to do the right thing, you know? We're just
Mm,
not seeing eye to eye.
okay.
Eh,
Uh,
even when in the late 80s, even in late 80s, he's still like, oh, I want to sign this agreement. I'm reluctant to sign this agreement because I believe in the Star Wars program, this strategic defense initiative.
yeah, yeah. I believe in George Lucas's vision. I think he
I
can
believe
really
in George Lucas's vision. Yes.
I think
I
he can
believe in
really close out the trilogy. I think he could do a good job. Um,
I want the
okay.
prequels.
Um, okay. So, what would be your rating for Reagan?
I appreciate the cinematography. There are moments where there's some suddenly ambitious cinematography, and you could feel there was money spent on some of the dolly shots, movements. But this sometimes, honestly, this movie felt like a big budgeted version of a Hallmark movie, and you just can't get that feeling out of your head. I just don't think this movie, the script, especially the script, if you're going to focus on Reagan's life, honestly, focus on a very specific time in his life. Make it very specific and hone in on it, and just kind of let everything fall by the wayside. If you're going to
Mm,
talk about him and his acting career and that what led him into politics later on that he was already kind of into in the beginning, that's fine. And then you can allude to him getting into politics later, or I'm the president now. Everything I had to do to get to this point in this major moment of like this balancing act that, oh, now I'm dealing with the Gorbachev and the Cold War, and I am now dealing with the Iran Contra scandal, but I believe in the Star War Initiative and tear down Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall in his waning days as the president while he's suffering from Alzheimer's. I think that would have been a better dramatic movie, but trying to condense it all into one, it just you just feel like you're just flying by. And the soundtrack, it's
yeah.
soundtrack is hit or miss, especially in certain moments. It feels really kitschy at moments. The acting really does feel characterized, and Dennis Quaid is a very talented actor.
Mhm.
So is like he's proven himself time and time again. I think Penelope Ann Miller does a fine job as Nancy Reagan. We just don't really get enough time or enough nuance to really get that relationship. So, with all that said, with all the supporting actors and all the things, I'm gonna give this a low stream it,
Low streaming.
a low stream it. It's bordering on a skip it.
Mm,
It was
okay.
bordering on a skip it, but it only hangs in there because I did appreciate some moments here and there. I did appreciate some of the respect in there. I just think it does, unfortunately, a disservice by being so sanitized, being so kitschy, being so like just not being able to really cover as much or in depth as I would like. Honestly, if you want to know a better story of Reagan, there are actually plenty of documentaries out there that go far more in depth and far more specific into the life of Reagan, and will give you a far better understanding of the person from there. From the documentary Ronald Reagan, I think that one came out in 2011.
Mhm.
There's one that came out in I think 2004, that earlier one, but I would recommend the 2011 one. That's pretty fair. There's a few out there that can give you a better, wider understanding of of him as a person, and like the political environment that he was in, he grew up in, the culture he grew up in, and how he became into politics and what was the environment at that time.
Mm, okay. Box office wise, this movie, so it's made worldwide. Let's see
It's
here.
not a lot. The budget was
24,
25, and it's at this point it's only made like 24, I think.
24 point, yeah, 24.2 million. It's the money it's made there. So it has to maybe do about 50 million, coming close to there to really break even, do kind of well there.
I was
Uh,
at least happy to see John Voight. That was kind of a
yes,
surprise.
John Voight is, yes, he's also in this. I heard they do kind of some wonky, like, de-aging technology with Dennis Quaid
Yeah,
in
because throughout the story, he's the story is told from the perspective of John Voight, who plays a KGB agent Viktor Petrovich, who is basically questioned why. questioned why the Soviet Union fell, and they used that as a quiche to bring in the who was assigned to surveil Reagan and discuss like Soviets' past ambitions to infiltrate DC and Hollywood, and he talks about his life as well. So that, but and that's kind of like how it leads into him knowing about Reagan and knowing about the situation that happened, like his life and how it kind of blends in. So they use that as like to like him and his different moments in his life and how he would know about it. So that's kind of how they start the film, and he as a introduction to the life and times of Reagan. It's okay. I think the aging is okay. Honestly, probably would have just been better if it's like a mix of makeup and CG. It's just, I'm sorry, John Voight's just too old.
Yeah, John Voight is what, in his 80s, 70s?
Yeah, man, he's in his 80s, bro. Like,
Yeah, 85. Okay.
yeah. John Voight is old.
Yeah.
And he looks good for, honestly, he's good for his age, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess you could say that. I mean, hey, if you're still up, still moving around, still mobile, I think that's a win at that age.
Yeah.
Yeah, biopics are tough. I think we saw a great one last year in Oppenheimer that really detailed a lot about the life of J. Robert Oppenheimer. But a lot of what some biopics would do, instead of going through, the person's whole life, they'll focus in on one area of their life, and this focused on the making of the atom bomb there
Which
by.
is probably his most interesting aspect of his life.
Yeah, so it really narrowed in and focused on that element. So I think that makes a biopic more focused when you have a specific event in a
Mhm.
life that you can kind of narrow in on, instead of
And
going
also
through all.
more palatable too.
Yeah, more palatable too there. And yeah, also this movie had a fantastic cast of everybody
Oh yeah,
there.
great cinematography, great acting, uh, top notch.
Yeah. I mean, really great movie. All one of my favorite movies last year there, and this was a biopic there. And then also, this had it tried to do something else with kind of the female love interest, because that's also another thing in these
Mhm,
movies when you have biopics about historical figures that are men, and then it's like, okay, well, what did the wife or the woman do, and then the woman's just kind of standing there.
mhm.
Here I think they do. I mean, Nolan does a lot more with that character here with Emily Blunt than probably other female kind of love interest or wives in these type of movies do. I think he did more with that character than normally is done. Especially she had a great scene in the courtroom scene. Well, not really courtroom, but when they were doing the, I guess, briefing, I guess you could say.
Yeah,
She really did really well there. So yeah, I see what you're saying about with Nancy Reagan and how that, yeah, the wife is just kind of just standing there, as well. But I do have a really good clip from Reagan, the film there, that if people wanted to.
All. Tear it down. Reagan smash. Reagan smash.
What's that?
Oh, it's just Reagan. Just leave him alone. He'll tire himself out.
Reagan sleepy.
Yeah.
honestly,
Good
that
part of
sounds
the movie.
about right. Honestly, you saved yourself a movie ticket.
Yeah, just watch that. Just watch good
Yeah,
old that. All right, so Dusk for Reagan gives it a very low streaming.